Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stephanie Michelle, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Sarah.
Today we are going to talk about body image. And I know that's a really big and broad subject, but I think we're talking a lot about this idea of making peace with our bodies. Some people it's body neutrality, some people are moving towards the body positivity side of things. And I think the question that often comes to people's lips is, how do I actually improve my body image? So I thought maybe on this episode, we could share some of the ways that we did that.
Yeah.
Other people might find that useful, and maybe even any tips or tricks that you have up your sleeve that you might use with clients.
Yeah. So when my body image journey was long, but addressing it wasn't something I formally did until actually before I recovered from food. You know, my binge eating actually was a secondary endeavor. So what I did that I think was incredibly helpful to me that I had never really tried before was I got a coach, but it was by way of a group initially. I joined a group. And this is at the time where social media, I was just dabbling in social media at the time, not as an account. And I found Jessie Nealand, who later became my personal coach. And she ran this group called Authentic Body Confidence, ABC. She no longer runs it. And it's a disservice to the world because I thought it was amazing. I think I took it twice. And she's really the one who introduced me to body neutrality. And I think the experience of being in a group was really cathartic for me, really healing. The connections I made in that group, I still speak to some of those women. And I think that, that's why we run groups, right? Like the power of that and the way that makes us feel and the way we hear other people saying things that were in our own minds. And I think that's a really big part of it is being able to get some of those thoughts that had always invaded my mind out into the open and to recognize that I had so much compassion for other people who had those very same thoughts. And I had that feeling of like, oh, how could you speak to yourself that way? You're so great, like, oh, wow, that sounds really harsh, and then realizing, well, that's what's going on for me. Why is this so different? I think that's sometimes the power of a group. But alongside of Jessie's coaching and all of her knowledge, I just learned so much in that year. That was where it began for me as far as changing my thoughts, because independently, like everything that I had tried to do myself to help my body image was I was just rehashing my own desire for weight loss over and over in my head and how to make peace with myself if I could lose weight. I mean, it was really, I just couldn't get out of my own way. So holding someone else's hand and being inside of a group was a way that I started to be able to think differently and feel accountable for thinking differently.
Mm-hmm. Even the phrase body image on my journey was just not one that has ever particularly resonated with me. This idea that I would change the way I saw my body. And there was something in the language because it is the work I was doing, but I don't know why. For me, that idea of body image work feels alienating. My focus was much more around, and this is the type of body image work, is how do I accept and make peace with my body? That phrase to me made more sense than the body image stuff, because in my mind, body image feels like it's about making peace with how my body looks. And I know it's more than that. That's just how the words land with me. And for me, it was much more about this relationship I had with my body. So there's the relationship with myself, and my body is part of that. We're more than our bodies, but also our bodies are part of us. We're not separate to them. We can't exist as we are.
Agree.
Outside of our bodies. And I love the group stuff, as you well know. I think there is something about hearing the stories, and this is why I suggested this particular episode, because I think by sharing our stories, people have fed back to us before that's what they find the most useful. Yeah. What were the things you were actually doing on the course? I mean, if you can do that without kind of breaking any copyright issues.
Okay, yeah, good question. Well, I just first want to say that the idea of body acceptance to me and the idea of learning how to accept my body, didn't land with me. I didn't want to accept my body. There was a real resistance about the idea of, well, this body's not acceptable. Why would I want to accept it? I want to change it. I think that was underneath a lot of, the resistance. For me, it was about I want to learn how to be in my own skin. And I had a client yesterday who said this. She said, I need to know how to not want to crawl out of my own skin all the time. And that I could resonate with. That was like, is literally that felt and visceral experience of, I don't want to be here. Like I want to get out, and how to deal with that emotion. And so the course itself, now there was a lot of that course that appealed to me in particular because I'm such a thinker. Like I think I love to think. I mean, there was but what is body neutrality, the concept of I don't need to love my body. I just need to kind of, she calls it grouchy acceptance.
Ah,
So it was, which it's very real to me. And that was part of her appeal, was that she presented everything in a relatable way. And that's about as much as I could muster. The idea of I could still be grouchy about it was like, yeah, maybe I could do that. That seems a little more realistic to me. But she also dove into the layers under it. And so we did a lot of investigating our values, which is something I hadn't done before, and also the fears that we have and how body image was the thing that we would use to distract us from deeper insecurities about belonging and connection and safety. And those were concepts that I had never really brought into body image. I never saw my body as a distraction from something else. I thought it very much felt like my body's the problem, like, period. I'm tired of hearing about how it isn't. It is. But she presented it in such a way that I started to investigate via journal prompts, had all these journal prompts around um, what were my memories, my earliest memories of not belonging, or when was the first time that I remembered feeling like my body was making me separate and other. Concepts that you'll find in books like The Body Is Not an Apology and now More Than a Body. I mean, but at the time, this was the first I ever heard of it. And it got me thinking on deeper levels of, okay, I can make more connections with what my body represents to me and the ways in which I see it as keeping me outside of connection and outside of safety, which were part of my value system. So I started to see how all these things were woven together. And the thinking about that over time and like letting all those ideas brew over the course of that year, maybe it was 9 months, but over the course of that time was a way that I slowly started to understand my body image. And I think that was part of it, is being able to see it for more than it appeared to me at the time.
I feel like mine differs a bit in that growing up, I always felt kind of okay in my body. I was naturally slim until my binge eating began. So for me, I feel like my binge eating came first, and that was when this conflict with my body began. And because the binge eating in the beginning was so visceral and quite extreme, comparatively speaking, to what I'd been doing beforehand, my body changed a lot in 9 months. So we often hear the stories of the people who look in the mirror and their bodies look bigger to them than they actually are. I think I had almost like the opposite experience. Like I felt like my body was smaller than it often looked to me. And then I would see it at other times when it looked bigger. And that was just, it was a real dissonance in my brain. So I could have times where I almost felt like I was in my old body where I did feel quite comfortable. And then I might catch sight of myself unexpected. And it was a shock. It was a shock to see myself. So there was something about being repeatedly shocked by the changes in my appearance that just causes splitting. You see it when people lose weight and it's like the brain can't keep up and it just still sees and experiences something different. I think I had it the other way around. My weight was going up and my brain couldn't keep up with those changes. And that, I think, was why maybe to some degree, I don't know if I would say easier, but I did have times where I felt fine and then times where I was like, oh no, this is the reality. And it was this swing between the two. It was such a pendulum between feeling pretty good and feeling absolutely awful that I was really struggling to have any kind of consistent sense of my physicality,
Yeah.
of my body. And another thing, particularly with me, was that I'd always prided myself on my energy levels. It was a personality trait, how much energy that I had. And people would remark on it, and I just could keep going. Like I never wanted to stop. And then all the binge eating started and I got ill, and that, like, it went. My body felt different. Everything about it felt different. So for me, a lot of making peace with my body has been about my body changing as much as it did, but really feeling so different in it. And the effect that even had on my personality. to lose that energy, to lose what felt like a part of myself. And then I didn't know who I was anymore. So for me, my body and how I felt became tied up in identity. So it was more this identity work and making peace with these changes
Mm.
than it being appearance was part of it, of course, because that was one of the things that would shock me, but less so about appearance than I hear other people talking about it.
Okay, interesting. I think identity is a huge piece of this, but do you feel like the energy in you changed because your body changed, or do you think this was all happening and your body changing was a byproduct of some kind of shift in your body that would have happened anyway?
That's a really good question. And it's looking back now, the whole thing's kind of confusing what came when. And if anyone listening hasn't heard our stories, you'll hear us talking about this in episode 1. But there was an element of I lost weight for the first time, but it was a very small amount of weight. Then the binge eating response was pretty extreme and my energy was so low, but I don't know whether the binging was almost part of trying to get that energy back. I
Hmm.
don't,
Well, because
who
you had the
knows?
thyroid thing going on too, no?
Well, it's a pituitary issue. So yeah,
Oh,
it knocks out your thyroid as well as everything else.
yeah.
It's
Which is
kind of
related to your energy.
absolutely
Yeah.
exactly that. So I very much see the energy levels being hormonally related,
Yeah.
exacerbated by the binge eating and everything else that was going on as well. But being able to pick out what was binge eating, what was like a reaction to restriction, what was a hormonal issue, I just couldn't. And I thought one day I would have all the pieces in place and I could say, right, it was exactly like this. And it's not, it's still muddled for me now.
Mm. Well, that's interesting because you're saying that you had a felt experience of a shift. Like it was more than what you were attributing your body to mean about you, it was actually your lived experience. Whereas I felt like my body to me I felt like when I gained weight, it was evidence to the world that of all of my shadow qualities. So to me, it was now everyone can see that I'm actually lazy, that I'm actually all over the place and out of control, that I'm actually undisciplined and I want to say introverted because I was really ashamed of it. And to me, it was like my body was the story that was putting that on display. And I was desperate to go back to a time when I felt I was hiding all of that because I didn't actually feel a difference in being in a thinner body or a larger body inside of me. It didn't feel different, but I felt like I was exposed. I felt like that, the weight was exposing parts of me because I had learned to attribute a lot of these characteristics with being in a larger body. And that's a cultural influence. If you don't show up if you don't show evidence that you are working out and that you're eating right and that you can control yourself, and control was a big theme for me. It's in my family. Like that was something you needed to have control, self-control. And I thought, this is just I now people see it. Now people see it. And to me, that was why I felt so desperate. And that was related to my identity because I felt like this is my identity. And now people know. Now I can't hide it from them or myself anymore. So in addition to power and hierarchy and status and these things that I had come to think that I needed to belong and to be acceptable and therefore to connect with other people, it was like taking that away from me. And I mean, that devastated me and drove me further into a depression because I felt that I couldn't show up and connect with other people unless I was certain qualities.
I was very distressed about the weight gain, very distressed. And for years, it was always the weight that was the problem. And I think around about the time when I started taking the focus off of weight was probably the time that I stopped talking about it all the time as well. And I caught this when I did a YouTube video with one of my closest friends, and we reminisced about my binge eating days and what she remembered. And she'd got these old messages from me that I'd sent way back when. And it was always about weight being the problem. Because there was something in my mind that if I could just get my body physically back to how it was, I would be back to how
Mm.
I was. I spent
Yeah.
years trying to get back to something. And no, I didn't want to accept that this was how things were. That I rallied against that and pushed against that a lot until I'd exhausted myself and had to accept that no, this is the way that things are. This is what your body is like now. This is how it feels now. Because I still even now struggle a lot with fatigue.
Mm.
That's not gone away. I have to really manage my energy levels.
I'm thinking about the way that memories can impact a lot of the way that we feel, what weight represents. And I don't know if you have an experience of this or not. And I know that you differ, because you said that your weight was pretty stable for most of your life, and it wasn't until you got into your 20s that it shifted. So I have a different experience in that when I hit the prepubescent years, my body started to show up differently, and it was I just I don't know how to describe it. I guess you would have called it at the time bigger boned. I just had a I don't know. That's the way my body still shows up, I think. And so I remember I used to ice skate, and we had, the ice skating outfits. And I remember I used to go with a couple of friends of mine who were very petite. And we were skating on the ice. I remember at the end of one session, one of the friends who we were there with came up to me and said, "Oh, Rachel said something about you, but I don't want to tell you what it is." And I was like, "What?" And I knew already what it was. But it came down to this whole drama thing, fourth grade, fifth grade, whatever, how old we were. And so my friend Megan said, "She says you look fat in your outfit." And I remember exactly where I was looking. I remember the ice rink. I remember the colors of my outfit. I remember everything about that moment on a sensory level. Like I remember the image and this and the sound of and everything. And I remember feeling like I was different. And that moment, which Sonia Renee Taylor describes as, this is the moment of splitting, of realizing that you and your body might be at odds. Like you are not one with your body, and you sort of make this separation from it, you split from it, and it becomes something outside of you. And that for me was one of the first times that happened for me, and I have a feeling in that moment of being different, but it wasn't good. It was, I'm different and I don't fit in. I don't fit into their, with them. And that feeling is what stayed. I mean, to this day, that when I have any moment of splitting, whether that's in my body or otherwise, when I feel different, I carry the feelings of that memory, like I don't fit in. And that's very threatening to me. It feels very lonely. And as someone who we've talked about, like I have high sensitivity, and I am very prone to loneliness, and just the fear of that for me, lack of connection, was so threatening that to me that's where that story started. And that was part of how this course I was in helped me put this together, of the story I was making about the power your body held to keep you separate from other people, and what that could mean as far as your ability to connect and find, just the human connection that we all crave so much, and some more than others, right? And so for me, my body image work began with recognizing that I was craving human connection, and that I was made to feel different, and I was assigning blame to my body based on a memory that I'd had, and fourth and fifth graders' perceptions of who belonged and who didn't, and how that story was showing up, and how I had more power over that now as an adult than I did at that time. And I could find human connection in my body. I sort of had to rewrite the story for myself. And a lot of my body image work has been rewriting what I think my body means about me, and the ways in which my body feels safe or unsafe as far as what my needs are. And the repetition of that, like repeatedly, the awareness of when that feeling is showing up for me, and the rewriting of it over and over and over again, until it became something that happens very, very, very quickly now. But it does still happen. It's like a flash though, whereas I used to just really fall into that story. And now it's like, it's much more automatic. I've carved a pathway in my brain that automatically knows what to do with that information. But that is the practice, in large part for me, is the rewriting and the rewiring of these original stories.
Mhm. Yeah, and I really relate to the story part, because that was very much my route as well. Although, as I've mentioned before, Byron Katie's work about questioning your story, because her whole premise is that the problem's in the mind, at least on the whole. She's like, every problem's in the mind, and she can take it
Yes,
to some
I have much to say about her.
quite extreme places. But, for the purpose of my situation, yes, there was something about that. So to really be able to look at what I was believing, and look at the reaction to what I was believing, what was the result? Because the idea is that you find the belief, and then you ask yourself, how do I react when I believe that thought? You ask yourself, who would I be without the thought? And then you do these turnarounds, and you look at it from an opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of times those questions brought me back from the brink, genuinely. And I found them extremely powerful to me at the time, because I could see how my beliefs were perpetuating this feeling. And by doing that over and over again, I still have the app on my phone. I paid whatever it was for the Byron Katie the Work app because it has the questions. You can just go through them on your phone. And every time I did that, I felt the release. And so it really helped me to experience that to be true for me. Because I never want to preach this at anyone and say like, oh, your problems are what you're believing. I don't think that's helpful at all. But I had the experience of experiencing that for myself. So then it felt true. No one could have told me, oh, your beliefs are what's making you unhappy. You just need to change your beliefs. That never would have worked. And Byron Katie is a very kind of gentle inquiry way. Like you can get to the end and still decide that your belief is true.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. We just want to take a minute of your time to let you know we're now on Patreon. If you would like to support our work and be a part of our growing community, please head to patreon.com/lifeafterdiets.
All of our patrons are invited to join us in our Life After Diets private Facebook group to connect with us and other like-minded souls. For more details about how to contact us or to work with Sarah or Stef individually, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. I think sometimes people would like exercises, actual things that they can do. I did do gratitude lists for a while, and I know that that's kind of become a bit of a, what's the word?
Generic self-help.
Yeah, almost a bit contrived or something like that. But for me, it was enormously helpful. At the end of the day, I would write down 3 things that I appreciated about my body for that day. So it would normally be focusing on things that my body has enabled me to do. If I really struggled, then I could go broader and make more generalized statements. But I think it really helped to train my brain to go and look for other things, to notice. And that came through repetition. There were many times where I thought, this is just a stupid paper exercise here. Like, I don't feel thankful. But I would still go through the motions. And I gave myself full permission to not feel any differently. It was about asking my brain to go and find these things for me, because if it was left to its own devices, it might go down some other catastrophic streets about it.
Yes, because its default setting is to look for the negative. So we have to intentionally inject that. And I find that to be true also. Some of the activities that I find myself working with clients are things I'm like, I always preface it by saying, I know how this is going to feel or sound because it did for me too. And some of those things, when done consistently, do really help, but they sound so cliche at this point. And gratitude lists being one. For me, another one was identifying language that I was using and I had zero tolerance policy for it. So I actually found language that was going on in my mind as I paid more attention to my self-talk. One word was disgusting. Another word was actually a sound I would make in my head or out loud when I would feel disgust in my body. I would go, ugh. It was this like really guttural, and I started to pay attention to when these words or sounds were showing up. And the more I paid attention to it, the more I realized how often that was happening. And then I had this voice that I injected of like, no, it wasn't like I had to replace it with positivity. That wouldn't have worked for me. It would not have resonated true. But it was almost like I would picture I think my inner parent of like just like the way that I'll sometimes parent my kids when I'm really on top of things, just like not a judgment, but just that's not okay. That's not okay. And it was just that gentle leading away from those words and sounds that and I was doing this multiple times a day, and sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes I was like, no, I deserve it, and I just would barrel right through it. But it was the noticing every day. And then I started to get into the pattern of recognizing there were certain times of day that would happen. Like every time I showered, those words would show up. And so it became in the shower, those words, as I was washing myself, I'd be like, ugh. And I'd be like, oh, there it is again. There it is again. Start to notice it so much. And then you're like, no, we don't do that. It's not okay. That practice was a huge, huge component of my of healing my body image or improving my body image, because it simply just didn't leave room for like that loathing and criticism. And it's not that it had to be like, how do we love my body? No, it was just that we don't tolerate that. That was huge for me. We love connecting with our listeners, so we host regular community events on Zoom. We also have a private Facebook group for our Patreon supporters. Please visit our website, lifeafterdietspodcast.com, to find out more.
For more details about how to contact us or to work with Sarah or Stef individually, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. That reminds me of things that I've talked about before, where I will catch myself and go, well, this might not be true. Like, I'm telling myself this is true. It might not be true. I'm not trying to convince myself it's not. If I try and get in an argument with that part of me, I'm just going to end up in a back and forth. But if I can cast some doubt, that helps to move me away, a little bit like your sound does for you. Another exercise that I sometimes get my clients to do, and I've done myself as well. Have you heard about this idea of writing a letter to your body?
Yes, it's one of the exercises that we do in the body image workshop.
Have you heard of the idea of writing a letter from your body?
Yes.
This was one that I did in the past, and I'd forgotten I'd even done it. So when we've talked about doing a journaling episode. So I was having a little look earlier for my journals, and I found some of the things that I wrote from my body to me. And it reminded me of what I realized from doing it is actually, I think I saw my body as this passive thing that I was attached to, that I was kind of annoyed with because it wasn't behaving the way I wanted it to. And now it wasn't looking the way that I wanted it to. And actually, like, my body was pissed off. Like, it's quite an angry letter back from my body. But there was one bit that I did want to read, because for me, it just kind of, when I wrote it. And so this is my body speaking. And my body says, "You say you want to make peace with me, but maybe I don't want to make peace with you. Have you ever thought about that?"
No, snarky.
Your
body's got some spirit.
But what it did is it made me ask the question, like, have I made peace with who I am beyond my body? This idea, making the body the problem. We think if we make peace with our body, we'll feel peace with ourselves. But if we can just, even with our minds, play with the idea of removing the body from that and going, can I make peace with the part of me that's more than my body? And I realized, actually, I'd kind of assumed that all that was part of the body, and it helped me to separate the two.
Yes.
And realize it was more than about accepting my body.
Yes. One, maybe we should do a letter writing activity in one of our live events, because we do host live events now monthly. And I wonder if having activities like this might be fun for people. You can let us know if you're interested in that.
Yeah. And whether you could write it before the event and just share bits of it anonymously if you wanted to.
Yeah, we could figure out how to do that. Just check our links and in the show notes to see when our next one is. But the other part about that brings, it brings up something for me, which is that so much I think about body image healing, for lack of a better term, is authenticity. And so when you're talking about making peace with oneself beyond the body, I think that so much of that is about finding your authentic self. And for me, I can speak for myself on this, but I felt like I had lived so long trying to be something different or to hide parts of me that I didn't know the difference anymore between who I really was and what my performing self was, and the parts I was trying to cover up. And when my food actually became more true, like when I honored my appetite and when I wasn't binging anymore, but I wasn't restricting anymore, and when things sort of just like really did level out and I was like, this is me eating as me, I also found that to be a way of extending the same liberty to my body. Like, I was able to say, this is my body now, whether it's bigger than I want it to be or not. It is who I am. And there was something about this authentic piece of me saying, like, when I honor my needs and when I'm not afraid of what those look like to other people, this is who I am. And to me, that guides me a lot, because I don't know, there's something about finding that authenticity and not being afraid of who you are that lends itself to body image, I think.
That's making me think of people pleasing. I come up against this a lot when I'm working with people. When you're used to people pleasing and molding yourself into what you think other people need you to be or what you should be, you don't even know who you want to be. You don't know what you want. And sometimes I'll set people homework to just keep asking themselves for a week, like, what is it I want in this situation? Even if you're not going to give it to yourself, because until we even have permission to ask the question, what do we want? We're not going to get close to an answer. But I think often the answer is, I don't know what I want, so I'm just going to go with what I think I should want.
One of the things that I did during this time was give myself permission to go into my bedroom and lay in my bed when I needed an escape, which is something I had been trying to do my entire life, but felt so much guilt around because I had a story that when I was doing that, I was not facing the world and I was depressed and I was introverted, which will show up again and again as a theme for me. I just was so ashamed of being an introvert and too sensitive, and maybe dramatic too was in there. I mean, but I have always, like, my safe spot is when I'm curled up in my bed with my covers on, looking out the window. Like, that's where I want to go. And it always has been. And I fought it and fought it and fought it. And I think I was working with a therapist at the time. And she was like, why is there this shame around it? I want you to do that. I want you to go into your bed when you feel that need, when things get too overwhelming or too loud in your, whatever it is, go and do. And so it became like homework I was doing, but I was like, oh, I have permission to do this now. And when I realized what a difference that permission made, I showed up myself. Like, I just realized how much, when you try to make yourself not what you are and not recognizing that your needs are valid, how that becomes a people pleasing. It takes you so far out of your authenticity. And when I think about that first year of when things really started to shift for me, that practice also coincided with it. And to this day, it's something that I'll hear like, oh, I shouldn't go do that. But I'm like, I need that. That is something I need. And when I look back, I've always needed, and it really restores me. And it's not that I need to stay there all day long. I used to, when I was really shaming it, I need to stay there for 20 minutes. And I do that almost every day. At some point, usually in the day, I need to do that. And this is an example of just recognizing what your need really is without a story.
And permission for me to try and figure out where I'm not giving myself permission and where others perhaps aren't giving themselves permission. I say you look out for the shoulds, because every time you're saying you should do this, you should do that, you're taking a permission away. And maybe it's like, I should not kill people. It's like, great, take that permission away. We don't want you to have that permission. But many other permissions, even in the non-diet world, permission to still want weight loss.
Yeah.
Even though you can see how it sends your eating more chaotic, even if sometimes you're trying to let it go and sometimes you're picking it up again. All those times, and people will say to me all the time, I know I shouldn't diet. I know I shouldn't do this. I know I shouldn't do that. And I always go, shouldn't you? Like, what do you think?
Is huge.
Yeah.
I think permission is one of the most underrated forms of evolution that we have at our disposal. I think when we give ourselves more permission to be ourselves or to eat or to want things that we shouldn't want, that we don't see the layers of pressure that's really putting on us until we say out loud, like, we have permission for that is allowed to exist, and it doesn't have to control everything, everything about you. I don't know, there's like this audible sigh when we give ourselves permission, which is, I think, such a piece of what this work is all about.
So true. I'll even push people sometimes and say, you do know you don't have to stop binge eating at all.
Yeah.
And they'll go, no, I do. I have to stop binge eating. I'm like, you don't. And they'll say, I can't live like this. I'll say, you can, you have.
Yeah.
You do not need to stop binge eating.
Yeah. Or you have permission not to, if you need it.
But exactly. But if you start from a point of, I don't have to do this, then to do it is a free choice.
We're all 2-year-olds, really, at heart. We just need to know we can, that we have autonomy. We are independent creatures. Yes.
We haven't talked about this in this episode, but I suppose that idea of deliberately exposing yourself to size diversity. Was that what you were going to say?
Yes, you took mine. I got to come up with another one.
So it's exposing yourself to different body sizes, shapes, colors, and you can do that by mixing up your Instagram feed to begin with. Where else? Because there will be people listening to this who don't really use Instagram. How else can you expose yourself to size diversity if not these social media places?
So this is a little bit of a different angle of that. But one thing I noticed that is hugely influential is television and magazines and the influence of that in our everyday life. And so for me, part of dissecting this has been not only filling my social media feeds, but also noticing when I'm being bought into the idea that everyone is the way that lady looks on TV. I have like an image in my mind of the show my kids watch. Every single member of the family is toned and beautiful and has perfect hair. And every time I see it, I'm like, I definitely would have been watching this show with blinders on before, sort of absorbing that was everyone's default way of looking. And now it's this conscious reminding oneself of that is a media depiction of what bodies look like. That is not real. Like that is a smaller minority than, so in that way, it's not necessarily diversifying, but it's pointing out when you're coming across it, because you will come across it every day, that the bodies we're typically exposed to don't represent everyone in the world, and that's typically represents a very small minority of people. But even just paying attention to people in your environment, just the people watching, and noticing how many times your eyes are going to want to gravitate towards people who have this quote unquote ideal body that you're like, oh, I wish I could have that body. And bringing your attention again to look at all the bodies in your environment, look at all of the people, and notice everybody, not just the ones that sort of are aspirational. Because again, it's part of that confirmation bias that our brains have, this default setting of looking to certain things.
And then maybe just to close, we could share the book that's had the biggest impact on our body image in this area. For me, it was, I really don't like the title, but it was Body Positive Power by Megan Jane Crabb. Have you read that one?
I haven't, but a number of my clients have and really like it.
I did. I listened to it on Audible 3.5 times. I don't know why it was a half time. I don't remember what point I stopped.
You're like, all right, I got it.
But it really did help me to loosen that grip on chasing the weight loss part. For me, it was one of the very last pieces that I really needed to kind of let my shoulders drop and really have permission not to secretly still want it and secretly keep trying to get it in some kind of subversive way.
Well, I already mentioned Sonia Renee Taylor's book, More Than a Body. Maybe we'll have a body image series in our next live call, and we can maybe bring together more resources and more concrete tools that we can use inside of that.
Okay. All right, then I think we're done.
All righty.
Okay.
That was helpful.
Yes.
I feel like we could always keep talking about some of these topics, but
always. We should do like a marathon episode at some point, like 3 hours. I really like that True Crime and Cocktails podcast, and theirs like 3 hours long. Their preamble is like 40, 45 minutes.
Do people listen to it that long? I feel like people are like, enough already. I gotta go to the bathroom. Or something.
Well, you can take them to the bathroom. They're not going to know. I wonder if anybody's in the bathroom now listening to this. And on that note,
I have to go to the bathroom.
Yes.
Like, I gotta go.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for listening, and hear us in the next podcast.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.